The first disturbance came as a whisper, so faint that even the warp, a realm of infinite screams, almost failed to notice it. A tremor, thin as a blade's edge, glided through its malignant tides and set its nightmares quivering. For a moment, the Imperium paused, as if drawing breath. Then the whisper deepened into a resonance older than the oldest demon, and every screaming soul lattice rippled in dread. Something was entering. Not a mortal, not a demon, not a god of this galaxy. Something other. The rift appeared without warning. No violent tear, no eruption of raw chaos. Only a serene unfurling, like silk drifting open in the void. Light poured from the breach, a radiance not seen in this universe since the first suns were born. The warp recoiled in confusion, as if unable to decide whether to devour or flee from the intruder passing through its depths. Lucifer Morningstar stepped across the threshold. He did not fall. He did not crash. He simply arrived, descending as though gravity itself existed only to honor him. His wings, once vast, once terrible, once feared across an entirely different cosmos, were folded against his back, luminous yet frayed by eons of exile. His eyes carried the calm of a being who had walked eternity and found little worthy of astonishment. Yet even he paused, studying the abyss around him. The warp swarmed like a living storm. Faces formed and dissolved in its currents. Demons lunged and retreated, uncertain whether this being was prey, rival, or something far beyond their comprehension. Lucifer regarded them with mild curiosity, like a man observing insects beating against a lantern. A colossal shadow rose from the depths, its body a cathedral of hatred, its horns arching like broken spires. Its voice was a billion snarls stitched into one. "Name yourself." Lucifer did not speak. He merely looked at the creature. The light in his gaze, soft, patient, almost compassionate, touched the demon's form. Wherever that light reached, the warp recoiled violently, spasming as if burned by something purer than holiness and more terrible than flame. The demon screamed and collapsed inward, dissolving into a storm of shrieking fragments. Lucifer stepped forward again. The warp struggled to exist around him. What little footing the realm possessed began to tremble. Tides surged in chaotic spirals. Currents recoiled as if the Lightbringer's very presence was rewriting the rules that bound them. Lucifer sensed it. The unease, the shifting, the weight of gazes far more ancient than the demon he had just unmade. Something was watching him. Many somethings. For the first time since he had crossed the threshold, he frowned. Then the vision of the Imperium peeled away, revealing the cold silence of real space beyond. A world hung before him, a grey, lifeless moon orbiting a gas giant painted in swirling storms. Its surface was scarred by abandoned manufactoria and rusted battlements, remnants of wars fought long before the Imperium's current age of decay. No voices, no life, only dust and stone and forgotten metal. Lucifer descended, drifting like a falling feather, until his feet touched cracked ground. Silence greeted him. Wind scraped dust across abandoned trenches. Bent and broken banners clattered weakly against steel poles. The air held the scent of rust, old ash, and something hollow. Hope long evaporated. He inhaled, tasting this new universe. It was a realm defined by oppression, fear, and unending struggle. The very sky felt tired. Nothing lived here without some form of suffering etched into its being. A faint smile traced Lucifer's lips, not of amusement, but recognition. "Another world ruled by pain," he murmured softly, no louder than a breath. He began to walk. Each step echoed lightly across the dead plain, Yet the ground seemed to remember it had once borne angels, and trembled in response. Light followed him, not harsh, not blinding, but warm and ancient, pushing back the gloom as though reluctant to let shadows cling to him. Far above, drifting in low orbit, an Imperial reconnaissance vessel registered a pulse of impossible energy. Sirens wailed across its decks. Servitors spasmed, their augurs overwhelmed. The crew scrambled to their stations, praying the Emperor would shield their minds from whatever anomaly had appeared on the moon's surface. On the command deck, Captain Thale gripped the railing, eyes narrowing as the scans painted a single impossible figure on the dead moon's surface. A man, unarmored, unarmed, surrounded by radiance. Impossible, blasphemous, terrifying. "Deploy the scouting cohort," Thale ordered, voice trembling but resolute. "No unauthorized entity steps upon Imperial ground." Dropships descended in iron formation, streaking across the broken sky. Engines thundered, scattering dust storms as they landed in a crude semicircle around Lucifer. Hatches slammed open. Shock troops poured out in disciplined lines, laser guns raised, purity seals fluttering. Lucifer did not stop walking. He regarded the soldiers with polite interest, as though one might regard a gathering of children reciting rehearsed lines. Their fear rolled off them in waves, thick enough to taste. A sergeant stepped forward, helmet lenses glowing red, voice amplified to hide the tremor within. "Halt! Identify yourself in the name of the God Emperor of mankind." Lucifer met his gaze. The sergeant froze. Not by will, but by something deeper. Some instinct that knew it had encountered a being no words could categorize, no weapon could threaten, no doctrine could comprehend. Lucifer spoke only a single word. "No." The universe bent. A ripple, soft as a sigh, washed through the soldiers. Their weapons drooped, their legs buckled, not injured, not harmed, but undone in spirit, overwhelmed by a presence that neither comforted nor condemned, only revealed. Some wept without understanding why. Others dropped to their knees, shaking. Lucifer stepped past them without pause. The sergeant forced out a final whisper, voice cracking under the weight of revelation. "What? Are you—" Lucifer did not turn, but his reply drifted back like the fading echo of creation itself. "Lost, as are you all." The words lingered in the dust-filled air, unsettling the minds of every soldier who heard them. A tremor rolled across the moon's surface, subtle yet vast, as though the universe itself had flinched at his presence. Then, from the horizon, a new vibration answered. Cold, metallic, relentless. Something else had sensed his arrival, and it was coming. The vibration that had stirred across the dead moon did not fade. It deepened, hardened, and took on the unmistakable rhythm of disciplined engines, vast in number and merciless in purpose. Even before the first shadow crossed the fractured landscape, Lucifer knew the Imperium's response was no longer merely curious. It had become afraid. Fear in this galaxy never arrived quietly. Yet far away, at the center of mankind's staggering dominion, another awareness stirred. On Terra, deep within the lightless vault of the Golden Throne, the Emperor's dormant consciousness shuddered. It was not a movement any mortal could witness, not a crack in bone nor a shift in rotted flesh, but a tremor in the Astronomicon itself. Thousands of astropaths gasped at once as they felt the beacon they served flicker like a candle threatened by an unseen wind. Most collapsed, clutching their skulls. A handful died instantly, consumed by the recoil of a power older than humanity. The High Lords of Terror felt the disturbance ripple through their chambers, but none dared approach the sanctum to seek explanation. The Emperor had not stirred in any meaningful way for 10 millennia. His silence was absolute and sacred. If something had provoked even a flicker of reaction from that agonized, lingering deity, it could only be a threat beyond their darkest calculations. In the shadows of the throne, the Emperor's mind, fractured, burning, yet immeasurably vast, drifted toward the anomaly that had brushed against his senses. It was not warp-born. It was not Xenos. It was not demon. It was something outside all boundaries of his long warfare with the immaterial. Something that carried light unlike the Astronomicon, power unlike psionics, and presence unlike divinity as humanity understood it. For a single instant, a silent thought crossed the Emperor's mind, too faint to be heard by any servant, yet resonant enough that the throne itself moaned beneath him. He has come. The Astronomicon shuddered again. On the dead moon, the soldiers who had collapsed before Lucifer struggled to regain their footing. Some prayed. Some whispered apologies to the god Emperor for their weakness. Others simply stared through their visors, transfixed by the figure who walked among them without haste or hostility, yet with an authority that undid the rigid lines of their courage. The engines drawing nearer resolved into shapes, monolithic transports bearing the sigils of the Imperial Guard, flanked by armored walkers and escort gunships. Dust spiraled beneath them as they formed a perimeter, their formations precise as iron teeth biting into the barren soil. Orders crackled across Vox channels, heavy bolters locked in place. Targeting arrays fed the commander's impossible readings. Lucifer continued forward, calm and unbothered, until the earth trembled beneath a colossal impact. A towering machine, bristling with weapons, descended upon hydraulic limbs. A night-pattern war engine stood before him, pilot sealed deep within its steel womb, its reactor humming with wrath. A voice boomed through external amplifiers, reverberating across the battlefield. Unidentified entity, submit to Imperial authority, kneel. Lucifer looked up at the machine, studying it with idle curiosity. The weapons aimed at him crackled with pent-up fury. The machine itself radiated devotion carved over centuries of war, martyrdom forged into metal. Yet beneath all that iron, he sensed a human presence, trembling behind layers of dogma and duty, masking fear with the weight of sacred machinery. He did not kneel. Instead, he raised a single hand, not in threat, but in acknowledgement. The reactor of the night flickered. Warning runes flared across the pilot's console. The machine staggered as though buffeted by a storm no sensor could detect. Inside the cockpit, the pilot screamed, feeling something press against his soul, not crushing him, but illuminating him with unbearable clarity. Every sin, every regret, every moment of shame he had hidden from himself was revealed as plainly as written scripture. The night stance faltered. Its weapons dipped. Shock rippled through the Imperial ranks. Lucifer lowered his hand and continued walking. Above the moon, aboard the reconnaissance vessel, Captain Thale stared in disbelief at the readings. His bridge officers argued in panicked tones, insisting no human or Xenos could produce such undetectable force. Some insisted the figure was a shard of a demon. Others swore it must be a punishment sent by the Emperor himself. Thale silenced them. "Prepare a Vox transmission to Terra," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "Use the highest clearance. Someone must know of this." The servitors obeyed, their monotone chants rising as they interfaced with the ship's astropathic relay. But the astropath did not answer. She sat frozen, milky eyes wide, blood painting thin trails down her cheeks. Her lips trembled as if speaking to someone who was not present, someone she feared. "He sees me," she whispered. Before Thala could question her, she screamed, a raw, soul-rending wail that ended in sudden, absolute silence. The air around her rippled, the instruments cracked, the lights died, and then a single whisper escaped her lifeless throat, spoken in a voice not her own. "Do not reach for me again." Lucifer had not looked toward the ship, yet the message was unmistakable. On Terra, the Emperor felt the pulse of that whisper. It cut through the warp like a line of fire, brief yet undeniable. There was no challenge in it, no demand, no defiance. It was a declaration of presence, calm, resolute and powerful, enough to disturb even him. On the moon, Imperial forces recoiled, struggling to decide whether to attack, retreat or pray. Lucifer paused at the edge of a broken ridge, gazing across the desolation. He sensed the gaze upon him, the ancient watcher bound to a golden corpse throne, clinging to existence through agony beyond mortal comprehension. For the first time since his arrival, Lucifer's expression changed, not with fear, not with anger, with recognition. "You," he murmured. The wind shifted, dust swirled, engines roared behind him, weapons primed to fire. And in that breath between moments, a second deeper disturbance stirred across the moon. Something moving beneath the ground, as if awakened by the same cosmic anomaly that heralded his arrival. Something older than the Imperium. Something that had been waiting. The tremor deepening beneath the moon's surface spread like a slow exhalation from something ancient, waking in the dark. Dust sifted upward in thin, uneasy streams. The Imperial formations tightened instinctively, armor clanking, weapons locking into firing positions. No commander had issued new orders. Instinct alone drove them. Whatever moved below was not listed in their briefings. It was not listed in any archive at all. Lucifer remained motionless at the ridge's edge, his gaze drifting downward as if reading the earth like an open book. Beneath the layers of stone and rusted war relics, he felt the stirring of metal wards long forgotten, sigils not born of the Imperium, but of civilizations erased by time and war. Something sealed away had recognized him, not for who he was, but for what he represented, an anomaly that bent the rules of existence simply by drawing breath. The ground split with a dull, resonant crack. Imperial soldiers staggered. The night reeled backward, planting its colossal blade into the earth to stabilize itself. A gout of dust erupted skyward as massive slabs of stone heaved apart, exposing a chasm descending into unnatural darkness. A cold, metallic sigh rose from the depths, like a vault exhaling secrets long denied the sun. Lucifer's expression remained unreadable. From within the abyss, pale blue lights flickered, then aligned with slow, predatory intention. The soldiers gasped as skeletal silhouettes emerged, their forms unmistakable even to the most inexperienced trooper. Metallic limbs, thin as ancient bones, caught the dying light. Green energy pulsed through their exposed spines. Featureless faces stared with soulless hunger. Necrons, an entire tomb complex, dormant for millennia, had awakened in the shadow of Lucifer's arrival. The first warriors rose with mechanical precision, their bodies shedding centuries of dust as they climbed the broken chasm walls. Their weapons, Gauss flares glowing with necrotic energy, snapped to attention as they locked onto the Imperials. The air trembled with the gathering power of 100 kill shots. Lucifer stepped forward. He did not accelerate. He did not lower into a stance. He simply walked, calm and deliberate, toward the intersection of two terrors, the Imperium and the deathless machines that had outlived empires. The soldiers shouted warnings. Some pleaded for him to retreat. Others prayed. They watched, transfixed, as Lucifer descended the slope toward both firing lines as though strolling through a quiet courtyard. The first volley erupted. Green beams sliced through the air, liquefying stone and metal alike. The shockwave rattled armor plates and sent Imperial troops scrambling for cover. But not a single beam touched Lucifer. Each one curved subtly away, bending off its deadly path as though unwilling to offend him. To the watching eyes, it looked not like deflection, but submission, energy itself refusing to strike him. Lucifer reached the base of the ridge, where Necron warriors closed in. Their metal feet clanged upon the fractured ground, forming a semicircle around him. Their stillness was oppressive, the silence of beings beyond emotion or hesitation. The Gorse weapons hummed, brightening as their protocols recalibrated to analyze the anomaly before them. One reached out, scanning him with a shaft of flickering light. Lucifer met its gaze, if such hollow sockets could be called eyes, and placed a single hand upon the barrel of its weapon. The machine froze, not in mechanical malfunction, but in something deeper, as if a memory buried beneath countless cycles had resurfaced and bound its will. Lucifer's power drifted through its metal frame, neither violent nor invasive, but illuminating. For a fraction of a second, the Necron's ancient programming hesitated, recognizing in this intruder not flesh, not warp, but something that stood outside categorization. The warrior stepped back. Others reacted with instant hostility, raising their weapons again. Lucifer exhaled, and the air rippled. The nearest rank of Necrons staggered, their energy cores flickering as if disrupted by a command from outside time. One collapsed entirely, its limbs disassembling into lifeless segments. Another emitted a shrill, distorted cry, a sound unnatural for machines, as though something inside it had awakened only to scream. Lucifer did not press the advantage. He simply continued walking, forcing both armies to adjust around him like tides shifting for an immovable object. Imperial commanders saw disaster unfolding, Necrons emerging, an impossible being walking unscathed, soldiers losing morale. Vox channels erupted with frantic crossfire of pleas for reinforcements, warnings of Xenos resurgence, and conflicting reports of the anomaly's nature. And yet, in the midst of chaos, one figure broke from the Imperial lines. A young lieutenant, barely past his trials, sprinted forward with reckless determination. His helmet hung from its strap. His hands shook as he clutched a Purity seal-covered data slate against his chest. He stopped only when he stood at Lucifer's side, his breath ragged, his voice cracking under fear and duty. "Please," the lieutenant whispered, staring up at Lucifer. "I don't know what you are, but if you can stop them, do it. We can't survive this." Lucifer turned to him. He looked not at the armor, the insignia, or the trembling hand clutching the data slate. He looked into the man's soul, saw the loyalty, the suffering, the indoctrination, the flicker of hope buried under years of war. The lieutenant felt exposed, as if every secret he had ever buried was being lifted into the light. Yet Lucifer's voice, when it came, was gentle. "Your world teaches you to kneel before suffering," he said softly. "Mine taught me to stand." The lieutenant's eyes widened, not at the words, but at the warmth they carried despite the surrounding carnage. Behind them, the Necrons advanced again, their formations tightening as their internal directives adjusted to the presence of the intruder. Their gorse flares rose as one, like skeletal forests bristling before a storm. Lucifer's gaze drifted to the deepening shadows beneath the chasm. More light stirred within. Dozens. Hundreds. The tomb was awakening fully. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Lucifer paused, not in fear, but in contemplation. If this was the world he had fallen into, then its darkness was deeper than he had expected, a place where even the dead refused to stay silent. He lifted his hand. The light around him intensified, not blinding, not harsh, but pure enough to make both Imperial and Necron forces hesitate for the briefest moment. The battlefield held its breath. The tomb complex roared beneath the earth, and from the shadows, something far greater than warriors began to rise. The lights rising from the depths thickened until the chasm resembled an open maw lined with stars. Each point of radiance belonged to a colossal figure slowly ascending, their silhouettes emerging through the dust like titans returning from exile. The Necron warriors halted as their protocol shifted, recognizing the awakening of a higher command. Even their soulless precision seemed to falter in the presence of such ancient authority. The first to rise was an overlord, its form sculpted from metal that glimmered like obsidian polished by eternity. Its cloak, woven from living energy strands, drifted behind it in unnatural currents. A staff crowned with a crackling orb of necrotic power extended from its hand. Its gaze, though empty of life, bore the weight of millennia. It scanned the battlefield, its intelligence unfolding like a cold, expanding shadow. Lucifer watched in silence. Behind the Overlord, more shapes ascended, stalker constructs with multiple scything limbs, immortals bearing weapons that thrummed with death-wrought precision, canoptech guardians crawling along the edges like metallic arachnids that had never known fear or rest. The tomb's awakening was not a mere response to intrusion, it was recognition. Something unprecedented had rippled through the fabric of existence, disturbing even these deathless machines. As the Overlord reached the surface, it raised its staff toward Lucifer. The orb blossomed with swirling arcs of viridian lightning, warping the air with malignant possibility. The Overlord's voice emerged, not spoken, but projected directly into the minds of all present, cold and resonant as a world's funeral bell. Anomaly, origin unknown, nature contradiction, directive neutralize. The declaration shattered what little stability remained in the Imperial's courage. A few broke from formation entirely, sprinting back toward the dropships, their prayers devolving into incoherent pleas. Others clutched their weapons like drowning men grasping driftwood. Even the Knight's reactor hummed with renewed urgency, the pilot's panic radiating through its massive frame. Lucifer, however, did not move. He sensed something else, not in the earth, not in real space, but rippling through the unseen tides above. A tremor of intent, far more dreadful than the machine legions before him. The air darkened for an instant, the horizon blurring as if the universe itself had blinked. A distant scream echoed through no mortal ear, yet every soldier shivered, sensing a chill that did not belong to air or fear. The warp was watching. Lucifer's arrival had been like a stone cast into a stagnant pond, and the ripples had reached beings who thrived in chaos and malice. Their attention was swift, ravenous, and unfiltered. Where the Necrons approached with cold logic, the entities stirring in the warp moved with hunger. The choir of demons awakened. A wave of psychic pressure crashed across the moon, like a storm of invisible blades. Imperial soldiers collapsed, clutching their skulls as if their minds were being peeled open. The lieutenant beside Lucifer fell to his knees, teeth chattering uncontrollably as whispers slithered into his thoughts. The knight staggered, its reactor fluctuating under the psychic assault. Even the Necrons paused, their systems flooding with distortion signals as the Imperium howled in proximity. Lucifer alone stood unchanged. He looked upward, not with alarm, but with a grave understanding. The warp did not see him as a mystery to be analyzed. It saw him as an intruder, a light that did not belong to its abyss, a force that broke its laws, eluded its grasp, defied its nature. And it screamed. The fabric of the sky rippled as invisible talons clawed against the boundary between realms. Voices, thousands layered upon thousands, rose in a discordant chorus. Rage, terror, awe, confusion. Every note blended into a cacophony that vibrated through stone and soul alike. Even the Necron's metallic frames trembled under the psychic convulsion washing over the battlefield. Lucifer closed his eyes. The voices intensified, swirling around him like storms of broken glass. Intruder, thief, light-bearer, fallen one. They spat names in languages older than chaos itself. You do not belong. You cannot be here. You cannot be. Lucifer opened his eyes slowly, and the whispers recoiled, as if a serene flame had brushed against them. The Overlord, regaining control, raised its staff and unleashed a beam of Gorse energy. It tore through the air, unmaking everything in its path. The ground liquefied beneath it, melting into glowing slurry. The beam slammed into Lucifer's chest and dissipated like mist striking a sunbeam. The Overlord tilted its head, its logic cycles stuttering. Its combat directives realigned, attempting to reconcile the impossible result. Its energy orb pulsed as it prepared a second strike. Lucifer stepped forward. There was no force in the movement, no violence, no posturing. Yet the air trembled as though it recognized the passing of something ancient. He placed his hand lightly against the Overlord's staff. The weapon dimmed. The energy orb flickered, guttered, and went dark. The Necron's internal system spasmed with cascading errors. It staggered back, its metal frame ringing like struck iron. Lucifer's touch had not destroyed it. It had unraveled something fundamental within it, its certainty. Its ancient programming, built upon the absolute truths of physics and domination, strained to comprehend a being that negated those truths simply by existing. Before the Overlord could recover, the warp scream deepened. A tear formed in the sky, thin, violent, pulsing with colors that should not exist. The boundary between realms stretched like flesh under a blade. Through it, shapes writhed, amorphous and whispering, their forms shifting with predatory intent. The Imperium had faced demonic incursions before, but this rift was not born of ritual or chaos manipulation. It had been triggered by a presence the warp could neither consume nor ignore. Lucifer's existence destabilized the very medium of its malice. A single howl rose above the others, deeper, more resonant, a voice that carried the authority of ancient dread. You do not belong here, Lightbringer. Lucifer's gaze lifted to the distortions writhing within the rupture. The warp shuddered under the weight of its own reaction to him, yet persisted, hungry and furious. The rift widened. Demons began to emerge. The battlefield braced for annihilation. And Lucifer, standing between soulless machines and the horrors of the Imperium, prepared to face the first true challenge this universe had offered since his arrival. The first demon broke through the rift with a roar that rattled the bones of every mortal on the field. Its form twisted like molten shadow, limbs reshaping with each movement, a thing sculpted from hatred and given sinew by the warp's obscene imagination. Behind it surged others, some slithering, some clawing their way into existence, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of malice. The breach widened, splitting the sky into a bleeding wound. The Imperial lines shuddered. Many soldiers dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by psychic pressure and terror. The Knight's pilot screamed inside his iron coffin, fighting to maintain control. Even the Necron's cold logic trembled under the psychic distortion, their internal systems scrambling to differentiate foe from existential anomaly. Lucifer watched the demon's emergence with a stillness that unsettled even the Imperium. Their hatred washed over him like waves striking a stone that neither absorbs nor breaks. He stepped forward, and the rippling brightness around him intensified, its warmth an affront to the screaming chill of the rift. But before he could engage, a thunderous roar echoed across the battlefield, this time not from demon or machine. A gunship tore through the dust-filled horizon, engines burning with righteous fury. Its hull bore the sigil of the Inquisition, a crimson eye carved into black steel and wreathed with iconography, warning all lesser beings to tremble. Its heavy cannons fired into the demonic horde, blasting apart the first wave of horrors. Warp flesh dissolved under explosive force, their shrieks scattering into vapor. The gunship descended in a controlled predatory sweep, landing with the grace of a killing blow. Its hatch slammed open, and through the rising dust strode a man wrapped in a stormcoat of reinforced leather, purity seals whipping violently in the wind. His armor was etched with wards, sigils, and oaths, written in the blood of martyrs. His eyes burned with a zeal that bordered on psychosis. Inquisitor Malachi of the Ordo Malleus had arrived. He advanced with measured steps, his rosette gleaming like a verdict of death. A psychic hood crackled around his neck as he surveyed the carnage with controlled fury. The Imperial troops scrambled to reorganize themselves, their hope rekindled at the sight of the Emperor's most feared servant. But Malachi saw only one thing: Lucifer. For a fleeting moment, the Inquisitor's stride faltered. His mind recoiled at the sight of the being standing untouched between Necron constructs and demonic monstrosities. There was no fear in Lucifer's posture, no desperation, no strain. The demons shrieked at him. The Necrons recalculated their approach because of him. The warp itself tore open to address him. Malachi had spent a lifetime hunting impossibilities, silencing heresies, and purging anomalies. Yet never had he encountered something that radiated quiet defiance to the natural and unnatural alike. His voice was low, sharp as a blade drawn in silence. "What are you?" Lucifer did not look at him yet. His attention remained on the demons pouring through the rift, the sky splitting deeper with every breath of the warp. He raised a hand, and the nearest demon recoiled as if struck by a force it could neither see nor comprehend. Its flesh bubbled, its form unraveling like a shadow cast against a sunbeam. Malachi's breath caught. A miracle, or a blasphemy, had occurred before his eyes. He forced his mind to settle. Emotion was weakness. Awe was corruption. His duty was absolute, forged in the crucible of humanity's endless war against the horrors that lurked in darkness. He stepped forward until he stood a few paces from Lucifer, the air between them crackling like the moment before a storm breaks. "Name yourself," Malachi commanded. "By the authority of the Inquisition, reveal your nature or be condemned." Lucifer turned his head slightly. His gaze, when it met the Inquisitor's, was calm, unthreatening, and yet it carried a resonance that struck deeper than fear. It was like staring into a truth the soul had always known, yet never dared to confront. "I am not yours to judge," Lucifer replied softly. The words struck harder than any weapon. Malachi's jaw tensed, fingers tightening around the haft of his demon hammer. Runes glowed along its length, eager for violence. For an instant, he considered attacking, driving the full force of the Emperor's might into this inscrutable entity. But then the warp screamed again. A larger demon tore free of the rift, its wings made of raw, immaterial flame, its body a grotesque mockery of divine form. It towered over all lesser horrors, its voice a thunderclap that shattered vox channels and ruptured eardrums. "Fallen star," it howled, "return to the depths." Lucifer faced it. The demon charged, its claws igniting with warp fire. The ground split beneath its weight. Even the Necrons paused, their logic struggling to calculate the trajectory of this new threat. Lucifer raised one hand. The demon struck. A shockwave tore across the moon, sending soldiers flying, shattering stone, and collapsing portions of the newly revealed tomb. Light blazed in a sphere of purity that rejected corruption. When the dust cleared, Lucifer still stood, untouched. The demon lay collapsed in a broken heap, its form flickering, unmade by a power not born of the warp but shaped by something far older. Malachi stared, unable to reconcile what he had witnessed. No psychic blast, no weapon, no ritual, only a gesture, only presence, only truth. His voice was quieter now, stripped of command and filled with something he had not felt since childhood. "If you are not demon, not Xenos, not psychic, then what could you possibly be?" Lucifer looked at him fully. "A being who fell," he answered, "and still walks." Before Malachi could respond, the rift shrieked louder, expanding into a spiraling storm. More demons gathered at its threshold, drawn by hatred, driven by confusion. Something larger approached, something ancient, its shadow spreading like a stain across the stars. Malachi tightened his grip on his hammer. Lucifer turned toward the heavens, and the warp screamed as though realizing it had underestimated him. The rift writhed like a wounded beast, its edges tearing wider as something vast pressed against the barrier between realms. Demons scattered from the threshold, fleeing in animal panic. Their fear, raw and instinctive, sent tremors across the battlefield more chilling than their rage ever had. Lucifer watched the distortion without urgency, yet even he sensed the shift. This was no mere incursion. This was a summons, chaos itself grappling with a presence it could not define. Inquisitor Malachi steadied himself as another shockwave shook the moon's crust. His psychic hood flickered, struggling to shield him from the warp's violent resonance. He glanced at Lucifer, unable to hide the disbelief hardening into grim realization. Whatever this being was, it did not cower before demons. It did not worship the Emperor. It did not fear. And that made him an anomaly more dangerous than any heretic he had purged. Before Malachi could speak again, the warp flare dimmed abruptly, its howl smothered as though a massive hand had closed over the rift. The demons froze mid-stride. The Immaterium's colors drained into a single spiral of shadow. Then a voice, deep, controlled, and filled with iron authority, rolled across the battlefield. "Stand down." It was not directed at Lucifer. It was directed at the demons themselves. They obeyed, slowly, like beasts tamed by fear. Malachi's breath caught. He recognized the oppressive weight of that command. It was no lesser demon, no wandering warp beast. This was something born of war, ambition, and hatred sharpened over 10,000 years. The next moment, the sky fractured again. This time, not from chaos, but from the thunder of atmospheric entry. Black Legion warships pierced the clouds like blades cutting through parchment, Their prows glowed with the molten fury of re-entry. Their hulls bore the mark of the Eye of Horus, etched in gold and shadow. Gunports glimmered with ready fire. The moon trembled beneath the shadow of their descent. Bolter fire erupted from drop pods streaking toward the surface, dozens upon dozens, each one a coffin of ceramite carrying a warrior whose existence was defined by annihilation. Malachi cursed under his breath. Abaddon's dogs, here. Lucifer watched the dark shapes streak downward, their trails carving fiery arcs across the sky. He had seen war before, across realms, across heavens, but never an army forged entirely from betrayal, fury, and eternal damnation. The very air recoiled at their approach. Drop pods crashed into the ground with seismic force, scattering dust storms across the ridge. Their doors detonated outward, unleashing Chaos Space Marines in black, armor trimmed with tarnished gold. Their visors glowed with the hatred of corrupted demigods. Chainswords whirred, heavy bolters roared. They advanced without hesitation, firing upon both Imperials and Necrons alike, for they cared nothing for sides. They had come for only one being. Lucifer. A towering figure emerged from the largest pod, his presence commanding even among traitor Astartes. Cloaked in shadow-forged steel, wearing a helm etched with ancient runes, he strode forward as though the battlefield belonged to him alone. In his gauntleted hand he carried a demon-touched spear glowing with balefire. Warsmith Carax of the Black Legion. His gaze locked upon Lucifer, and hatred twisted into hunger. So, Carax growled, voice like thunder scraping against stone. The rumors were true. A being the warp fears. A light chaos cannot bind. A prize Abaddon himself desires. Malachi stepped toward Carax, hammer raised. You will not claim anything this day, traitor. Carax did not bother looking at him. I speak not to you, worm. He advanced another step, his armored boots sinking into fractured stone. I speak to the one who has disturbed the long war. Lucifer studied the warsmith with quiet curiosity, as though observing a man who had traded his soul and then forgotten the price. The Black Legionnaires formed a semicircle behind their commander, weapons aimed but not firing, not yet. They awaited Carax's judgment, sensing this confrontation was not mere slaughter, but something older. You are not of this galaxy, Carax said. Your power is not of the warp. That makes you useful. Lucifer almost smiled. Useful to whom? Carax's spear ignited with fresh malice. To the War Master, to the future of chaos, to the destruction of the corpse on the Golden Throne. Behind Lucifer, Necrons whirred, recalibrating their directives. Before him, demons howled softly, their instincts recoiling from Carax even as they faded into the shrinking rift. Imperials steadied their weapons, torn between terror and duty. The battlefield balanced on a blade's edge, 3 armies tense, waiting for the first strike. Carax raised his spear. You will come with us, willingly or broken. There is no third option. The arrogance of the demand rippled across the field, like a challenge issued to the stars. Lucifer tilted his head slightly, the light around him softening into something serene, yet unyielding. I do not serve, he said. Carax snarled. Then you die. The warsmith lunged, spear swinging with the strength of a demigod. The impact sent a ring of molten dust spiraling outward. But the blow never touched Lucifer. He raised one hand, 2 fingers extended, and the spear froze mid-strike. Carax's armor groaned from the force he exerted, his muscles straining as if locked beneath a mountain. Lucifer met his fury with calm. I walked away from thrones far greater than yours. The spear trembled. Carax roared. The battlefield shook. And something else happened. All three forces, Imperial, Necron, and Chaos, felt it. A shift in air, a tightening of gravity, a pull like a deep intake of breath from something colossal. The warp rift twisted anew, not opening, contracting, as though something enormous were drawing breath on the other side. Malachi felt it first, his soul recoiling. The Necron sensors spiked with impossible readings. Even the Black Legionnaires faltered, their corrupted hearts beating unevenly. Carax's eyes widened behind his helm. "What have you awakened?" Lucifer released the spear. The warsmith stumbled back. The rift pulsed once, hard enough to bend shadows. Something vast moved behind the veil, and the moon fell silent, awaiting the arrival of a power the warp itself had tried and failed to suppress. The rift's contraction deepened, pulling the air inward with a force that made dust spiral toward the sky, reversing gravity in unsettling flickers. Every living and unliving presence on the moon felt its pull. Necron optics flickered. Chaos armor groaned. Imperial soldiers clutched at the ground as though the very void sought to claim them. Even Carax paused, his rage disrupted by the vast, invisible inhalation behind the warp's dark veil. Lucifer watched the distortion with an expression that was neither fear nor fascination, but recognition, like a man hearing an old echo return from a great distance. The rift pulsed again, shrinking into a single spiraling point of impossible density before slowly unraveling, fading back into the unnatural stillness of real space. The demons that had crawled forth howled as they dissolved, their forms pulled violently back into the immaterium. Those too slow to escape disintegrated into warped smears of light. When the final shimmer vanished, the battlefield lay in a thick, vibrating silence. The warp had recoiled, not defeated, not banished, but retreating like a wounded predator, watching from the shadows but unwilling to strike again so soon. Inquisitor Malachi exhaled, chest heaving from psychic strain. "What did you provoke?" he whispered, voice raw. He had faced demons, heretics, sorcerers, and warp beasts that defied rational thought, but never had he seen the immaterium shrink from anything. His gaze flicked to Lucifer, and the fear he'd kept at bay now crawled coldly across his spine. Lucifer did not answer immediately. He stepped forward, placing himself between the fractured ridge and the ruins of an ancient shrine visible beyond it. What once might have been a shrine to the Emperor now lay in shattered arches and toppled statues, their stony faces eroded into expressions of mournful decay. The moon's wind whispered through the remnants of wings sculpted on the fallen effigies, carrying dust like the remnants of forgotten prayers. He walked toward them, compelled not by curiosity, but by something else. An echo of memory stirred by ruin. Carax, recovering from the rift's closing, advanced again, spear raised, fury rekindled. "Do not turn your back on me, creature. I will drag you before Abaddon myself, even if I must." Lucifer lifted his eyes toward the shattered statues, ignoring him entirely. "It is always the same," he murmured. His voice traveled across the broken court like a fading hymn. Malachi heard it. The soldiers heard it. Even the Black Legion froze, uncertain whether the whisper was meant for them or something far older. Lucifer continued, each word soft yet resonant. Civilizations born from hope, bending their faith into chains, erecting monuments to salvation that crumble into prisons. He walked between the broken statues, brushing dust from a stone feather with his fingertips. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. The same story, repeated across countless realms. Malachi stepped closer, hammer still ready. But his voice held curiosity beneath suspicion. You speak as though you have watched empires rise and fall. Lucifer looked at him, the weight of eternity flickering behind his eyes. I have. The Inquisitor felt a chill, not from the words, but from the way they were spoken, without pride, without sorrow, only truth. For the first time, Malachi understood the scale of the being he was confronting. It was not a demon, not a god, not a man. Something far older walked in mortal shape. Karak snarled, forcing his warriors forward. You speak like a prophet, but you bleed like a mortal. Lucifer turned to face him. Do you wish to test this? The Black Legionnaires tensed. Their bolters rose. The warsmith tightened his grip. But before he could attack, the ground beneath them trembled again. This time, not from warp distortion, but from the deep rumble of awakening machinery. The Necron Overlord advanced, its full legions assembled behind it. Their silent steps formed a metallic cadence, endless and precise. Its staff reactivated with a hum, energy coalescing into a blade of viridian lightning. The Overlord approached Lucifer directly, its voice resonating through psychic metal. Interference detected. Objective. Identify the threat's dominion. Lucifer regarded the Overlord not as an enemy, not as prey, but as a curiosity. Dominion, control, authority. The machine sought classification, the universe reduced to categories it could understand. I claim no dominion, Lucifer said. A falsehood, the Overlord replied. All beings exert dominion. Through force, through belief, through presence. Your existence alters tactical probability matrices. Your power destabilizes reality. This is dominion. Lucifer's expression softened. There was wisdom in the machine's logic, even if unintentional. Perhaps dominion was not something one declared, but something one carried. Malachi stepped beside the Necron, hammer raised toward Lucifer. He threatens the Imperium. That alone confirms his allegiance to the enemy. Carax laughed, dark and derisive. Everything threatens your Imperium, little man. The tension thickened, 3 forces circling the same point, each interpreting Lucifer differently. To the Imperium, a heresy incarnate. To the Necrons, an anomalous variable that defied classification. To Chaos, a weapon to be taken or destroyed. To Lucifer, another fractured world calling itself righteous. He turned fully toward the fallen shrine. The statues of winged guardians lay broken, their faces chipped away, their forms eroded by millennia. Their message, whatever it had once been, was lost. He touched the stone, and for a moment, an image flickered behind his eyes. Not of this shrine, but of another age, another realm. Wings ablaze with radiance, voices raised in harmony, a throne not made of gold, but of light, a fall that tore heaven itself apart. He drew his hand back. In every world, he said quietly, they build altars to hope and use them to justify cruelty. Malachi felt a stab of anger. You dare judge humanity? Lucifer met his gaze. I judge only what I see. Carax stepped forward, spear crackling. Enough philosophy, he growled. You will kneel. Lucifer's eyes shifted to him. No anger, no threat, only a gaze that pierced deeper than words. Carax felt something cold coil in his chest. Not fear, something worse. Irrelevance. Lucifer spoke softly. Why must every realm seek to own what it does not understand? The warsmith roared, charging with renewed fury. But before the spear could strike, the moon's horizon flashed with distant fire. A vox channel burst to life in Imperial ears, static-laced, frantic. Reinforcements inbound, multiple signatures, unknown fleet approaching. The message cut off. A new shadow fell across the battlefield. Something enormous had just entered the system, and all three armies realized at once. Lucifer's arrival had awakened far more than tombs and rifts. The shadow eclipsing the battlefield stretched wider with every passing second, swallowing the pale light of the dead moon and casting all beneath it into a hushed, unnatural dusk. Even seasoned warriors, Imperial, Necron, and Chaos alike, found themselves staring upward with grim anticipation. None recognized the silhouette at first. None could name the fleet whose arrival had darkened the horizon. Lucifer's gaze lifted calmly, as though he had expected this new turn long before any sensor or auger detected it. The air vibrated with distant thunder as the void ships pierced through the upper atmosphere, their forms cutting through clouds as silent as omens. They were colossal, cathedrals of war, each one large enough to blot out mountains, their hulls lined with statues of saints ravaged by time and conflict. The Imperials gasped, some dropping to their knees in reflexive reverence. Malachi's eyes widened, disbelief and dread warring in his expression. "Impossible," he whispered. "They were not meant to be here." Karak snarled at the sight, gripping his spear tighter. So the lapdogs come crawling, chasing rumors like scraps. But the ships bore no single legio heraldry. Their hulls were scorched, their banners torn, their iconography mismatched and faded. They were a fleet pulled from disparate crusade remnants, regiments forged not by order but by desperation. A fleet responding to a disturbance so severe that boundaries of command had been shattered. Drop barges descended from their bellies, massive armoured structures shuttling thousands of mortal soldiers and hundreds of Adeptus Astartes. Their engines bellowed like dying beasts as they tore through the atmosphere, trailing fire behind them. Before they touched down, the sky ignited. A psychic scream erupted across the battlefield, shrill, dissonant, and filled with suffering. It seemed to rip the fabric of thought itself. The Imperial troops collapsed first, clutching their heads, blood seeping from their noses, ears, and eyes. Even Space Marines staggered, their enhanced minds buckling under the psychic weight. Lucifer felt it too, not as pain, but as sorrow. For the scream was not an attack. It was a cry for help. He turned toward the source even before it manifested. A shudder passed through the moon's surface as a new breach, smaller but no less dreadful, split open between the ruins of the shrine. This one was different. It did not spill demons. It spilled sound, voices, thousands of them, whispers of dying cities, pleas of broken armies, cries of children buried in rubble, agonies of worlds scourged by plague and fire. Every voice layered atop the other, woven into a single psychic lament so potent that the air trembled with grief. Malachi, gasping and pale, staggered toward Lucifer, clutching at the ground with blood-slicked fingers. This is no demonic cry. This is an astropathic wail, broadcast through the warp, 10,000 souls screaming their last moments. Carax tilted his head. Even behind his helm, the warsmith was uneasy. Warp echoes do not manifest like this. Lucifer stepped closer to the breach. The voices grew louder, weaving themselves into a tapestry of despair. He closed his eyes briefly, listening, not to the words, but to the truth behind them. Worlds burned, fleets shattered, faith withered. Yet within the roar of agony, he sensed something else. A thread of hope, delicate and fierce, refusing to die. The moon shook under a sudden impact as one of the incoming barges crashed into the surface, ploughing through ancient stone and coming to a violent halt. Its doors burst open, releasing a tide of soldiers, Astra Militarum, battered and exhausted. They carried wounded comrades on makeshift stretchers, their eyes haunted by horrors unseen on this moon. Officers barked orders that barely held their formation together. One soldier fell to his knees, staring wide-eyed at the icily glowing breach. "They followed us," he muttered, voice trembling. "God Emperor preserve us. They followed us here." Malachi seized him by the shoulders. "Who followed you? Speak." But the man could only stare. Glassy terror clouded his gaze as he whispered, "Everyone." Lucifer turned toward the Imperial reinforcements. Their uniforms were scorched, their armor cracked, their banners torn. They had not come to wage war. They had come fleeing one. He moved closer, and the soldiers instinctively parted, awe and dread mixing in their minds. The psychic wail intensified as the breach pulsed, projecting its anguish into reality. Lucifer knelt beside a dying officer laid on the stone, her breaths shallow, her skin grey. Her eyes opened faintly, and she saw his face. "You're not supposed to be here," she rasped. Lucifer did not correct her. "What did this to you?" She reached a trembling hand toward the breach. "Not what? Who?" Malachi leaned closer. "Who?" The officer's lips quivered as she forced out the name. "A saint. Fell." Lucifer felt the shift ripple across the battlefield like a cold tide. A fallen saint. A being of imperial reverence. Warrior, martyr, icon. Twisted by the warp. Spreading destruction across systems. Leaving psychic screams in its wake. Malachi staggered back, horror etched across his face. Carax barked a cruel laugh, though even he sensed the danger. Lucifer stood. The psychic voices crescendoed into a piercing cry, agonizing, pleading. It was not directed at the Imperium, not at Chaos, not at the Necrons. It was directed at him. He stepped toward the breach. Light gathered around him, soft but immense, pushing the air away in gentle waves. The voices shifted, becoming clearer, as though the presence they had reached for finally stood near. Malachi called out, "Do not enter that breach. We do not know what lies." Lucifer ignored him. The stone beneath his feet cracked as he approached, the breach widening in response. The wail transformed into a single unified whisper, one filled with terror, recognition, and desperate hope. "Lightbringer, help us." Lucifer paused. That title belonged to a past he had tried to bury. The breach pulsed again. Something on the other side was moving toward him, something immense, broken, and dangerous, and the thousand souls screaming across the warp were running from it. The breach pulsed with a steady, sickening rhythm, like the heartbeat of a dying star. Each throb pushed waves of psychic residue through the air, echoes of fear, loss, and something far darker. The Imperial reinforcements formed ragged lines around the ruins of the shrine, their weapons trained on the shifting distortion. The Necrons stood motionless, their metallic bodies reflecting the unnatural glow. The Black Legion gathered in a semicircle, poised like predators awaiting the perfect moment to strike. But all their eyes, whether organic or artificial, were drawn to Lucifer as he approached the breach. Malachi struggled to regain his footing, leaning on his hammer as though the psychic weight around him sought to crush his spine. "Do not step through," he warned, voice cracking. "This is no ordinary warp tear. Something monstrous waits within." Lucifer paused beside a broken column, his fingers brushing its scorched surface. The stone was warm, not from heat, but from psychic residue, as though countless hands had once touched it in prayer. He felt the lingering devotion, twisted now by fear and despair. "This place remembers," he murmured. Malachi staggered forward. "Memories do not matter when a corrupted saint is coming for your head." Lucifer turned slightly, regarding him with patient calm. It is precisely because memories matter that this is happening. Malachi's jaw tightened. You speak as though you understand faith. I understand devotion, Lucifer replied, and how it can be twisted into chains. Before Malachi could answer, the breach roared, an anguished sound, like a chorus of souls being torn apart. The ground trembled. A whirlwind of ash spiraled upward, coiling around the breach until it formed a towering vortex that reached for the sky. The air grew thick, suffocating, heavy with the weight of a sanctity corrupted. A figure emerged. At first, it was only a silhouette, wreathed in radiant flame that flickered between gold and sickly warp fire. The flames struggled, warring against each other, burning bright one moment and guttering the next. Then the figure stepped through fully, and the battlefield gasped as one. She had once been human. She had once been beautiful. She had once been a saint. Her armor was sculpted like the vestments of a martyr, gilded plates etched with prayers now warped into spirals of bleeding script. Her wings, once crafted of pure light, were fractured, one burning with golden brilliance, the other twisted into a molten, shadow-torn ruin. Her eyes were the most haunting, one bright as the Emperor's flame, the other a void of swirling crimson. Saint Celestian, the miracle of Harrowfall, lost a century ago to a warp storm, found again, but not saved. The Imperial soldiers dropped to their knees, torn between reverence and terror. Some whispered her name in trembling hope. Others wept, recognizing the corruption that clung to her like a second skin. Even Malachi froze, his rigid certainty struck down by the sight of a figure he had prayed to since childhood. Karak stepped forward with a dark grin. A fallen saint. How exquisite. The warp does fine work. The corrupted saint lifted her head, and the battlefield fell silent. Her gaze wandered across the armies, not seeing them as enemies or allies, but as echoes of suffering she could no longer escape. When she spoke, her voice was two at once, one soft, divine, filled with sorrow, the other venomous, torn from the warp's deep pits. Help. Me. The plea struck every mortal present like a blade to the heart. The golden eye pleaded for salvation, for release. The crimson eye promised ruin if it was denied. Lucifer stepped closer. The saint's attention snapped to him instantly. The air rippled as her wings flared, light and shadow expanding like opposing tempests. She stared at Lucifer with recognition deeper than memory, as though she had felt his arrival across galaxies. You, she whispered, both voices merging. You are the one they fear. Lucifer stood a few paces away, the ruins of the ancient shrine rising around them like a cathedral built from ashes. They fear what they cannot control. The saint shuddered. I cannot hold them back much longer. Her corrupted wings spasmed violently, sending a burst of warp fire into the stone, melting it into slag. They are inside me. They hunger. They cling to my soul. Then let go, Lucifer said gently. A shriek tore from her throat, half holy lament, half demonic roar. I cannot. I am bound. I am drowned in their voices. The golden flame of her left wing blazed brighter. The molten ruin of her right wing writhed. The two halves warred. Lucifer approached unarmed, unafraid. Each step sent a ripple of light across the ground, pushing back the warp fire seeping from her. Malachi watched with dread and awe, knowing no mortal could approach her without being incinerated. The saint trembled, clutching her head. Stay away, she cried. I am not. Her corrupted side lunged, launching a spear of warp flame toward Lucifer. It struck him square in the chest and vanished. The saint froze, horror flashing across her fractured expression. How? Lucifer reached out, not touching her, only offering his hand between them. You are not beyond salvation. The words struck her with the force of a nova. Her entire form convulsed. She staggered backward, wings flaring as divine fire clashed violently with warp corruption. Screams tore from her, thousands of souls bound within her armor echoing her agony. Malachi cried out, "What are you doing to her?" Lucifer's eyes softened. Nothing. The truth is doing this. The saint fell to her knees. Ash swirled violently around her, forming spirals around the ruined shrine. Her golden eye fixed on Lucifer with desperate hope. Her crimson eye twisted with murderous hate. "End it," she begged through tears of flame. "End me before they take everything." Carax laughed savagely. "Yes, Lightbringer, strike her down. Kill your first saint." Lucifer did not move. He looked at the broken woman before him. He looked at the armies circling them, hungry for resolution. He looked at the sky, remembering another fall, another war, another plea. He knelt in front of her. The saint gasped, tears of molten gold falling onto the ground, sizzling. "Free me," she whispered. The corrupted wing rose behind her, poised to impale Lucifer. The divine wing folded toward him, seeking absolution. Malachi watched in breathless terror. Carax prepared to strike the moment Lucifer showed weakness. And in that impossible crossroads between salvation and annihilation, Lucifer reached out, not to kill her, but to choose. The corrupted saint screamed, and the moon trembled, awaiting the consequence of Lucifer's decision. The saint's scream was a rending of spirit and matter, a sound that seemed to peel the air itself apart. Lucifer's hand hovered inches from her cracked helm, not touching, yet close enough that light rippled from his fingers like threads of dawn attempting to weave themselves into the corrupted fragments of her soul. The ruined cathedral around them trembled under the force of her agony. Ash rose in violent spirals, twisting through the broken arches, as though the memories of long-dead worshippers had awakened to witness her torment. Her wings convulsed, one blazing with desperate divinity, the other lashing outward in a frenzy of warp-torn madness. The corrupted wings struck with a screech like metal dragged against bone. Lucifer met the blow not with strength, but with presence. A pulse of radiance flared around him, soft yet unyielding, turning the strike aside, as though the air itself refused to let her harm him. Malachi shouted his name, or tried to. His voice cracked under the pressure of psychic forces tearing through the shrine. "You cannot save her. She is tainted beyond redemption." Carax barked a laugh. "He cannot even save himself, little Inquisitor." Lucifer ignored them both. His gaze remained fixed on Celestian, whose golden eye flickered with rapidly fading clarity. "You want release," he said quietly, "but you fear it almost as much as the corruption consuming you." She trembled, clawed fingers digging into the stone. "I do not fear death," she whispered. "I fear dying with them still inside me." The corrupted half of her face twisted, lips tearing into a snarl, not her own. The warp fire wings spread wide, and an inhuman voice gurgled through her throat, overlaying her own pleading words. "She belongs to us." The warp surged through the saint's body in a violent shock, hurling Lucifer backward across the shrine. He struck a fallen column, dust cascading around him. The ground splintered beneath Celestian as she rose into the air, her wings flaring outward in an eruption of blinding light and shrieking darkness. The very stones beneath her cracked, unable to withstand the opposing forces tearing her apart. Malachi raised his hammer, fighting through terror. "She's becoming a conduit. If that rift reopens, the ground split. A fissure tore through the shrine, emitting a howl so deep it vibrated inside the bones of every living creature present. The air warped. Leaves of ash spiraled upward as the sky twisted into unnatural colors once more. A sickening reality dawned over Malachi as he stared into the forming breach. This is not the same rift, he realized. It's worse. The corrupted saint screamed again, her body arching as if invisible chains pulled her toward the growing tear. This new storm felt less like an opening and more like a rupture forced upon existence itself. Its center pulsed with a darkness thicker than void, swallowing color and sound into a whirlpool of unmaking. Necrons recalibrated their targeting protocols, registering impossible readings. Their optics flickered with corrupted data. The Black Legion staggered back, armor groaning under the weight of psychic backlash. Even Carax, for all his fury, seemed momentarily unsure. "What is this?" he demanded. Malachi whispered the only answer that made sense. "A warp storm that should not be. Something is trying to break through her." Lucifer rose slowly from the shattered column, and the light around him surged in a steady arc, stabilizing the fractured stones. His gaze hardened, not in anger, but in recognition of the cosmic truth unfolding before him. The saint was no longer merely corrupted. She was becoming a bridge. The storm expanded, dragging debris into its spiraling maw. The world darkened. Flames guttered, then inverted into streams of shadowed light. The screams of the thousand souls echoed again, no longer mere memory, but active agony, as though the breach sought to reclaim every life touched by the saint's fall. Lucifer moved toward her, each step steady despite the hurricane of psychic force. His coat whipped like wings in the violent currents, but nothing slowed him. He reached the edge of the vortex, and the storm recoiled slightly, recognizing his presence even in its madness. "Celestian," he called. Her head snapped toward him. The golden eye widened, the crimson eye narrowed, the divine flame guttered. The warp fire surged. "Help me," she pleaded through clenched teeth. "Let me free you," Lucifer answered. The corrupted voice shrieked through her throat. "She is ours. Her faith, her suffering, her devotion, all ours." Lucifer stepped closer, extending one hand, but the storm flared, blasting him backward again. The shockwave shook the ruins, sending shards of stone flying. Malachi barely managed to shield a group of wounded soldiers with a ripple of psychic energy from his hood. Carax lunged through the dust, spear glowing with balefire. "Kill her," he roared, "or chaos will claim a weapon that could tear worlds apart." Lucifer rose once more, intercepting Carax mid-charge. His hand closed around the spear, not with force, with finality. The spear dimmed instantly, demonic flames snuffed like candles before a rising sun. Carax staggered back, disbelief cracking through his fury. Lucifer did not look at him. "This is not your war," he said. "It is everyone's war," Carax spat. Lucifer's eyes flashed, soft and terrifying. "And yet you understand so little of it." He released the spear and Carax fell back, overwhelmed not by strength, but by truth. Lucifer faced the saint again. The storm had grown to engulf the entire shrine. Swirling clouds of warp energy tore at the ground, dragging statues into the void. The ancient cathedral's remaining arches collapsed one by one, their fall muffled by the storm's devouring howl. Celestiane hovered at its center, her body breaking under the strain of 2 eternities pulling at her soul. Lucifer stepped forward again, and this time the storm did not throw him back. It parted, not in surrender, in fear. He approached the saint, his presence carving a circle of calm around them. Light gathered around his hand, not harsh, not holy, but pure, older than sanctity, untouched by corruption. The saint's golden eye flooded with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't. I tried." Lucifer raised his hand to her helm. "You are not lost," he said softly. "You were never theirs." The storm convulsed. The corrupted wing lashed out. Warp fire surged. Lucifer touched her brow. A blinding flash erupted, white, gold, and shadows screaming as they collided. The storm howled with rage. The saint screamed with release, and the entire moon trembled as the warp itself recoiled from the Lightbringer's touch. The flash faded slowly, reluctantly, as if the very fabric of reality needed time to accept what had just occurred. The storm's roar dwindled into a hoarse whisper, then a thin, trembling breath. When the blinding radiance finally dimmed, the cathedral lay in ruins, stone reduced to ash, steel twisted like wax, ancient icons shattered beyond recognition. The air hung heavy with a silence so profound it felt like the aftermath of creation itself. Lucifer stood motionless at the storm's heart. Cradled in his arms was Saint Celestian. Her armor, once torn between divinity and corruption, was fractured and dimmed, the light from her wings extinguished. One wing, now only tattered remnants of golden feathers, lay folded against her body. The other, the molten warp-twisted appendage, had entirely vanished, leaving scorched air in its absence. Her breaths came shallow and uneven, as though each one fought a battle against the lingering shadows clinging to her form. Malachi approached slowly, hammer lowered, awe and confusion clashing within him. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Is she free?" Lucifer did not answer immediately. His gaze drifted over the ruined shrine, the fissures in the ground still glowing faintly with residual warp energy. The storm had not fully vanished. It lingered like a wounded predator, its taste of reality fresh and maddening. But its center had been torn away, robbed of the anchor that had allowed it to manifest. Celestian was no longer its doorway. Her eyes fluttered open. When she spoke, her voice was faint and human, fragile in a way that made the battlefield's three armies waver in their certainty. "Light, bringer?" Lucifer met her gaze. "You are safe," he said softly. Her lips trembled with a fragile smile. "I felt them leave. All of them. Their claws, their lies." A shiver coursed through her. But I also felt something else, something older, something that reached for me when even faith failed. Malachi swallowed, the words striking a chord in him he did not wish to acknowledge. "The Emperor was with you," he insisted. Celestian's eyes shifted toward Lucifer instead. "No," she whispered. "He was." The Inquisitor stiffened as if struck. Before he could speak again, an inhuman roar split the silence. Carax charged from the dust, spear raised, armor scorched from the storm, yet burning with unbroken rage. "Enough of this sanctimonious weakness," he bellowed. "You would tear apart a storm of the warp itself for a broken saint, yet you would deny the Warmaster his prize." Lucifer gently lowered Celestian to the ground, rising to meet the warsmith's fury. The air around him shifted with his movement, not heated, not electrified, but sharpened, as if the world itself held its breath. Carax lunged. Lucifer caught the spear mid-strike. The ground beneath them splintered. The Black Legionnaire's corrupted strength met Lucifer's calm stillness, and the clash rippled outward in a shockwave that sent ash spiraling skyward. The energy blades along the spear crackled, screaming as though in pain under Lucifer's grip. "You cannot stop what is coming," Carax roared, forcing the weapon forward. You have made yourself an enemy to every power in this galaxy. Lucifer's voice remained soft. I was an enemy long before I arrived. With a flick of his wrist, he twisted the spear, wrenching it free from Carax's grasp. The warsmith staggered backward, armor groaning as he caught his balance. Lucifer did not strike him. Instead, he snapped the spear in half, as though it were little more than brittle wood. The demon trapped within shrieked as his prison shattered, then dissolved into smoke that dissipated against Lucifer's presence. Carax froze, disbelief breaking through his fury. Impossible. It was bound by lies, Lucifer said. Such things cannot hold me. Malachi watched the exchange with silent dread. The Necrons recalculated their assessment, their logic cores struggling to categorize a being who defied their understanding. Imperial soldiers, worn, bleeding, trembling, stared at Lucifer with new, uncertain reverence. But Celestiane's gaze alone carried certainty. She looked up at him with awe, sorrow, and unspoken recognition. You truly are, a light fallen and yet untouched. Before Lucifer could respond, the ground rumbled again, deep and resonant, not from warp distortion this time, but from something approaching across the barren landscape. A distant roar of engines, gunfire, explosions. The reinforcements that had fled whatever horror shadowed their retreat were being pursued. The survivors scrambled across the horizon, dragging wounded comrades, their voices hoarse with exhaustion. They're coming, one soldier cried, stumbling toward the shrine. Malachi seized him. Who? Name the enemy. The man could hardly speak through his breaths. Black Legion, reinforced, demons with them. More coming from the breach you just closed. It's reopening somewhere else. Lucifer's head lifted slightly, senses reaching far beyond the limits of mortal perception. He felt the tremors of hatred moving across the battlefield. He felt the warp's confusion, its wounded pride at being repelled. And beneath all of it, he felt a deeper pull, an echo calling him toward the fault line between divinity and corruption. His arrival had shaken the galaxy. Now the galaxy was shaking back. Carax regained his footing, helmet cracked, eyes burning with renewed fervor. Do you hear that, Lightbringer? He growled, pointing toward the oncoming darkness. That is the sound of inevitability. You think you have won something here, but the long war does not end. Not for saints, not for angels, not even for you. Lucifer looked not at Carax, but at Celestiane, the broken saint, lying between salvation and oblivion, her fate hanging on the edge of a blade he had barely begun to understand. Then he looked at the horizon, where the sky darkened under a fresh tide of chaos. A storm he had not yet touched, a storm coming for him. For the first time since entering this universe, Lucifer felt the faint, distant echo of destiny stirring, an echo he had once rejected, now drawing near with terrible insistence. Celestiane whispered, "Will you go?" Lucifer offered her a hand, helping her sit upright. "I go," he said, "because your world burns." Malachi stepped forward, voice shaking with equal parts hope and fear. "Then where will you stand, Lucifer Morningstar? With us, or against us?" The battlefield held its breath. Lucifer turned his gaze toward the darkened sky, and in the trembling silence between heartbeats, he answered not with words, but with a single step toward the oncoming war, choosing his path in the only way that mattered. The horizon churned like a wounded beast, its crimson haze trembling beneath the rumble of distant engines. The air tasted of metal and smoke, carrying the copper tang of spilled blood from battles Lucifer had not yet reached. He stepped forward, the broken saint at his back, the shattered cathedral whispering with every movement of his coat. Each footfall sounded heavier than before, not with fatigue, but with the gravity of a universe rearranging itself around him. Malachi followed closely, torn between reverence and terror. "If you go to meet that force alone," he warned, "you will be struck down. They bring Astartes, demons, war engines, things born for slaughter." Lucifer did not slow. "I have met slaughter before, but not like this," Malachi insisted. "Not in a galaxy where faith shapes reality itself." Lucifer paused. He looked at the Inquisitor, and something in his gaze softened. He understood what Malachi truly feared, not the coming war, not the demons, not even the Black Legion. It was the possibility that Lucifer might choose the wrong side, or no side at all. Before he could speak, Celestine's strained voice echoed behind them. She had managed to stand, supported by the cracked remains of a fallen column. Her fractured armor glowed faintly, threads of golden light crawling across the damaged plates like fragile veins fighting to reignite holy fire. "There is something else," she whispered. "Something watching." The battlefield fell unnaturally still. Even the distant thunder seemed to quiet. Lucifer turned toward her. "You feel it?" She nodded weakly. "A presence, not warp, not chaos, not your light either. It is older." Malachi's heart froze. "No," he murmured. "That cannot be." But it could. It was happening. A pressure descended upon the moon. Not physical, not psychic, but spiritual. An immense weight pressing on every soul like the judgment of an unseen god. Soldiers dropped to their knees. Necrons paused mid-cycle. Even the Black Legionnaires looked around in momentary disorientation. Karak snarled. "What trickery is this?" Lucifer felt the presence fully then, vast, restrained, agonized but eternal, like a flame burning within a tomb of its own flesh. He had sensed it once before, in distant whispers carried through the warp when he first arrived. Now it was no whisper. It was a gaze that crossed the void between terror and the broken moon, a gaze from the golden throne. A faint beam of psychic gold flickered across the sky, thin as a filament, yet vast enough to stretch light years. It passed through clouds, stone, and armor without resistance, striking Lucifer like a finger pressed against his soul. The Emperor had turned his attention. Lucifer stopped moving. The golden filament enveloped him in a halo so soft, it almost contradicted the crushing weight behind it. Malachi gasped, clenching his hammer until his knuckles bled. To witness the Emperor's gaze, even a fragment of it, was to stand beneath the weight of a dying star. Celestiane fell to her knees, tears of molten gold streaking her cheeks. "He sees you," she whispered. "He sees you completely." Lucifer felt the contact deepen. Not words, not thoughts, not commands. A recognition. Two ancient beings measuring each other across an impossible divide. The Emperor's presence was fractured, brittle, bound by machinery and prayers that had turned to shackles. Yet beneath the agony, beneath the stagnated divinity, Lucifer sensed the echo of a mind once brilliant, once willing, once proud. A king trapped on his throne, a father chained to a dying empire, a weary god speaking in silence. Lucifer closed his eyes, and the Emperor spoke, not in language, but through a single overwhelming intent. "Do not unmake what I have bled to preserve." Lucifer's breath left him in a slow exhale. He understood the warning. The Imperium stood on the edge of collapse, held together by fear, faith, and the Emperor's unrelenting will. Lucifer's presence threatened that balance, not because he sought to destroy it, but because he existed outside its truths, he answered with an intent of his own. I did not come to break your world. The golden light pulsed, once, twice, like the flicker of a dying flame. Then the Emperor pressed further. Will you stand beside mankind, or against it? Lucifer opened his eyes. The battlefield blurred into focus. Dust, ruins, war on the horizon. Mortals trembling under fear of a darkness that devoured everything it touched. Even the Necrons, even the traitors, even the saint. They all waited, suspended between hope and despair, their futures poised on the answer of a single fallen being. Lucifer felt the Emperor's agony deepen, not as a threat, as a plea born of a universe that had forgotten how to hope. Malachi stepped forward, trembling. Answer him, he whispered. Please, answer. Lucifer lifted his head toward the heavens, and he answered, not with submission, not with defiance, with truth. I stand where light is needed. The golden beam flickered violently, as if struck by a storm. Malachi cried out, shielding his face. Celestiane bowed her head. Even the Black Legion staggered, armor whining under psychic strain. Lucifer continued, voice steady. And your world has forgotten what light is. The Emperor's presence surged, a tidal wave of psychic fury and desperate restraint. The golden filament brightened into a glare that scorched the sky, then shattered into a rain of embers that fell upon the moon like dying stars. Silence followed. The Emperor was gone, but the warning remained. Malachi lowered his hammer, breathing hard. Then there will be consequences, he whispered. Lucifer turned toward the approaching storm of chaos engines, their shadows now cresting the ridge. There always are, he replied. Celestiane rose weakly. Will you fight them? Lucifer watched the advancing horde, demons bounding beside black-clad Astartes, war engines belching fire, sorcerers splitting the air with spells, a tide of apocalypse. He stepped forward. The light around him grew, not heavenly, not holy, but ancient, boundless, defiant. I will, he said. And the battlefield braced, knowing the next clash would shake more than stone and flesh. It would shake destiny itself. The battlefield lay poised between ruin and renewal. Dust hung thick in the air, obscuring the horizon where black-clad Astartes and demons surged forward. Yet every figure, the Necron legions, the shaken Imperials, even the battered Black Legionnaires, moved as though anticipating the first strike of a force beyond comprehension. The ruins of the cathedral, once silent, now hummed faintly with the residual echoes of light and warp alike, trembling under the weight of destiny converging on a single point. Lucifer Morningstar. He stood on the highest broken arch, the light around him calm but immense, holding the attention of every creature that could perceive it. Celestiane knelt beside him, recovering slowly, her golden eye flickering with renewed hope, her broken wing still smouldering. Malachi clutched his hammer, standing amid the scattered Imperials, every muscle taut with fear and reverence. Carax, the warsmith, raised his ruined spear, ready to leap again, but hesitation flickered in his gaze. Even the overlord of the Necron forces calculated carefully, delaying action, uncertain of this anomaly's effect. Lucifer's eyes scanned the battlefield. Chaos engines crested the ridge, bolters spitting death indiscriminately. Demons poured forward, screeching and hissing, their forms twisting as if reality itself could not contain them. Necrons shifted into their tactical formations, ready to eliminate any threat that disrupted their order. Imperials scrambled to hold lines and tend the wounded, their faith shaken by events they could not explain. He did not move first. He did not rush. He allowed the storm to approach him, feeling its weight, studying its rhythm. Every scream, every roar, every hiss of war machines and warp-touched entities was a pulse, and he measured each beat carefully. The golden light around him flared subtly as he lifted his voice, resonant yet gentle, and spoke so all could hear. I do not fight for allegiance, nor for dominion, nor for obedience. I fight for balance. I fight for those who cannot stand against the chaos that consumes them. The words cut across the battlefield like a blade. Soldiers paused. Demons recoiled. The Overlord calculated anew. Carax's grin faltered. Even Celestian gasped, understanding fully that he claimed no empire, no crown, no throne. Yet his presence alone redirected the tide of fear. "Then we follow," she whispered, voice trembling with awe. "We fight for what remains." Lucifer nodded once, not to her, not to Malachi, not to Carax, but to the universe itself. He stepped down from the arch, and the dust and light around him rippled outward in waves, soothing the broken earth and warning the approaching enemy. The Necrons hesitated, their targeting arrays faltering under the unquantifiable force of his presence. Chaos Marines slowed their advance, instinct screaming that this was not an enemy that could be engaged by force alone. Malachi raised his voice, rallying the Imperials. "Hold your ground, stand with him. If you falter, all is lost." Soldiers stiffened, weapons raising with renewed determination, though their eyes betrayed lingering doubt. They looked at Lucifer, not as a commander, not as a god, but as a singular force that had arrived from beyond the known, cosmos. They sensed, even without comprehension, that they had been given a choice, a glimpse of hope within a galaxy otherwise ruled by despair. The warp trembled above the battlefield, as if aware that its schemes, its hunger, and its legions were about to be tested in a manner it had not foreseen. Celestian, leaning heavily on her one surviving wing, rose and extended her hand toward the incoming demons. Her voice rang clear across the chaos, amplified by the faint resonance of Lucifer's light. "Face the judgment you cannot escape. The light-bearer stands." At once, the battlefield shifted. The demons hesitated mid-stride, their snarls faltering. The Chaos Space Marines bristled, but found their movements subtly impaired, as though the very air conspired to restrain them. The Necron Overlord scanned Lucifer with unerring precision, but its calculations faltered in the face of an unknown variable, uncertain whether to attack or preserve the anomaly for further study. Lucifer raised his hand slowly, fingers extended. Light poured forth, not blinding, not holy, but undeniable, carrying authority that none could resist. The cracks in the cathedral beneath him flared with energy. Dust and debris lifted, swirling in spirals around the archways, forming temporary protective barriers. Even the molten shadows of Celestian's broken wings shimmered in harmony with the glow, bending the energies of the battlefield into a rhythm dictated by the Lightbringer. The Black Legion surged, Carax stepping forward with renewed fury. "You dare restrain chaos. You dare interfere with the War Master's will." Lucifer did not answer. Instead, he moved toward the nearest tide of advancing demons. The air around him condensed with quiet force, a subtle weight that bent light and thought alike. Each step he took seemed to peel layers of corruption from reality. The demons screamed, their forms twisting as if the universe itself rejected their intrusion. One by one, they collapsed, not destroyed, but suspended, rendered powerless in the presence of a force older than their malice. Celestiane followed him, her voice clear and commanding. "Stand, for the living, for the fallen, for all who suffer. Malachi watched, awestruck, as soldiers reformed their lines, inspired not by orders, but by the undeniable manifestation of authority and defiance that radiated from Lucifer. The Necron overlord hesitated at the edge of the engagement, calculating endlessly, its troops immobilized by uncertainty. Carax, snarling, charged again, spear ignited with demon fire. But the Lightbringer met him halfway. With a gesture, the spear bent, shattered mid-air, and the Black Legionnaires faltered, losing their cohesion. The chaos that had seemed unstoppable a moment ago now wavered under his presence, re-evaluating its purpose, its aggression, its very existence. Lucifer stepped forward once more, and the battlefield seemed to shift beneath him. The ruin of the first cathedral, the shattered stones, the twisted spires, they all realigned subtly, guided by his will. The storm of war loomed around him, yet he did not flinch. He was calm, immutable, and utterly decisive. He did not seek conquest, nor did he claim victory. He simply imposed order on the impossible, asserting presence where none had dared to resist. And in that instant, three forces, Imperium, Necron, and Chaos alike, understood something fundamental. They understood, without question, that the being before them was no longer merely an anomaly. He was the axis upon which their fates would turn. He was the arbiter of what could live and what would die. The universe had presented its challenge, and Lucifer Morningstar had chosen not to bend, not to flee, but to stand. The horizon darkened with the approach of new reinforcements, the next wave of chaos and demonic fury racing toward them. Celestiani's wings flared, golden light merging with molten remnants of warp. Malachi raised his hammer with trembling hands, and Carax bared his teeth behind the Black Legion helm, fury unbroken. Lucifer lifted his head, light radiating from him like a beacon. "Then let them come," he said quietly. "Let them come, and we will see what remains of courage and hope when the storm is met." The battlefield waited. The universe waited. And at the heart of it all, the Lightbringer moved, ready to face the tide. The battlefield shook under the weight of approaching doom. Black Legion engines tore across the shattered plains, leaving trails of fire and smoke that painted the sky in red streaks. Demons poured through residual rifts, their forms obscene, contorted by the Imperium itself. Even the Necron overlord's armies advanced with mechanical precision, guns and gorse flares raised to obliterate anything standing between them and what their logic identified as a threat. Imperial soldiers, battered and bloodied, gripped their laser guns with trembling hands, their prayers barely audible over the din of destruction. And at the center of this storm of flesh, metal, and warp, Lucifer Morningstar stood, a solitary figure bathed in light neither wholly divine nor entirely mortal. He did not move hastily. He did not shout orders. He simply observed, his calm presence rippling through the chaos, asserting authority not through command, but by existence. Around him, Celestiane regained her strength, her golden wing glowing faintly, the remnants of her warp-corrupted counterpart flickering like dying embers. Together, they formed the nucleus of a defiance no one had anticipated. The demons hesitated, their instincts screaming that this was no mortal adversary. The Chaos Marines faltered mid-step, uncertainty flickering in their corrupted hearts. The Necrons paused, calculations grinding, systems straining to predict a variable beyond the scope of millennia of logic. Even the Imperials stood taller, inspired by the unspoken truth radiating from the Lightbringer. Some powers could not be measured by guns, faith, or fear alone. Lucifer raised a single hand, and the air itself seemed to respond. A wave of quiet authority emanated from him, bending shadows, quelling the shrieking of warp-born monstrosities, and steadying the faltering morale of humanity's soldiers. The battlefield stilled, momentarily, in reverence, as though creation itself leaned closer to witness what would follow. Then, as if acknowledging a challenge centuries in the making, the demonic tide surged forward with renewed violence. Bolts of searing warp energy erupted across the plains, tearing stone and bone alike. The Black Legion's bolters roared, and the mechanical rhythm of the Necrons added to a symphony of war that could have drowned entire worlds. Yet, Lucifer did not retreat. He stepped forward, each movement deliberate, each step a defiance of the natural order that governed all who had come to challenge him. The Lightbearer's presence expanded, not in fire or flame, but in absolute certainty. The rifts themselves seemed to recoil, as if the warp recognized a being it could not bend. Demons, their forms grotesque and twisted, struck at him with claws, teeth, and arcane weapons. But every assault faltered. Energy bent away, flesh recoiled. Reality itself resisted the encroachment of evil upon the one who had walked beyond stars and light alike. Celestiana rose, her golden wing unfurling fully, the last remnants of corruption purged by the Lightbringer's touch. Her voice rang across the battlefield, firm and commanding. For those who cannot rise, for those who suffer unseen, for the fallen, we stand. The Imperials shouted in reply, forming lines once shattered by terror, bolters firing in synchrony with renewed purpose. The Necrons, observing the impossible, held their fire, their mechanical minds registering a truth their creators had never anticipated. Even the Black Legion's fury began to falter, uncertainty creeping into their ranks, for they sensed the tide turning against them, not through brute strength, but by the presence of one who bent reality with intention. Lucifer advanced further. The battlefield seemed to fold around him, stone and debris rearranging subtly, guided by his will. His light extended like a vast invisible tide, touching the hearts of the desperate and the terrified alike, offering clarity in the midst of chaos. The demons screeched in confusion, their forms unraveling as though touched by the certainty of a law they could not understand. Chaos Marines, bound by centuries of corruption, hesitated, their coordination faltering. Carax, sensing the shifting balance, roared defiance, raising his demon-imbued spear for a decisive strike. But Lucifer met him mid-advance, his aura flaring in quiet intensity. The spear clanged against his presence, not breaking him, not wounding, yet every blow met resistance as though reality itself reinforced his form. Carax faltered, disbelief cracking through rage. Lucifer's gaze met his, unwavering, as if judging the entirety of his ambition and cruelty in a single glance. The sky above the battlefield fractured once more, not with fire, not with warp, but with a radiance that bent the colors of dawn and dusk into impossible harmonies. It poured downward, washing over all who stood beneath it. The demons shrieked and recoiled. The Black Legion staggered. The Imperials steadied themselves with newfound resolve, and the Necron overlord halted, unable to compute a force beyond its understanding. Lucifer lifted his hand toward the sky. A single pulse radiated outward, subtle yet absolute. The rifts convulsed, the demonic assault faltered, the tide of war paused, and in that pregnant silence the battlefield understood. This was no mere combat. This was a reckoning. Celestiana stepped beside him, wings glowing fully restored, her gaze steady. "Now," she said, voice resolute, Let them see what it means to oppose the light-bearer. Lucifer nodded once. His eyes scanned the horizon. Every enemy advancing felt the weight of inevitability pressing down upon them. The warp quivered. The Imperial steadied. Even the Necrons, timeless and unyielding, felt the tremor of a force not of this galaxy, yet utterly dominant within it. He moved forward, and the battlefield shifted under his presence. Shadows recoiled. Light followed him, not blazing, not divine, but inexorable. Every form of corruption and death that surged against him began to unravel in response, not through violence, but through certainty. A tide of order in the heart of chaos. A single truth against the endless lie of despair. The first wave of demons collided with that presence and dissolved, their shrieks swallowed by the absolute calm that emanated from him. The Chaos Marines hesitated, faltering under the weight of recognition that they faced not a mere warrior, but an impossibility. Even the Necrons, programmed to annihilate without hesitation, froze, scanning and re-scanning, their logic incapable of resolving what stood before them. Lucifer continued advancing, light radiating like a beacon for all who dared to stand with him. The battlefield itself seemed to bend in obedience, stone and ash rearranging subtly, protective spirals forming around allies and corrupted forces unraveling. The tide of war had been met, not by steel alone, nor by psionic might, but by a single lightbringer asserting presence against the dark. And as he walked, the impossible became undeniable. The universe itself recognized a force beyond allegiance, beyond fear, beyond power, a force that could not be destroyed, a force that would challenge destiny itself. The battlefield waited, the armies frozen in awe and terror alike, as the light-bearer moved forward, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, knowing that what came next would shake not only stone and flesh, but the very foundations of fate. The battlefield lay in shambles, beneath the fractured sky, yet it remained alive with the pulse of conflict. Fires burned across the ruins of shattered spires, ash drifted in slow, mournful spirals, and the scent of scorched stone mingled with the tang of blood and oil. The armies that had faced one another with fear and fury now paused, witnessing something that transcended allegiance, technology, or faith. At the center of it all, Lucifer Morningstar moved like a figure of inevitability, light and presence unbowed by the horrors and titans arrayed against him. Celestiane hovered nearby, her golden wing fully restored, the remnants of corruption erased by the Lightbringer's touch. She surveyed the battlefield with eyes wide, still trembling from the intensity of what had occurred, yet filled with the clarity of understanding. Around them, the Imperials formed lines, bolstered by the courage that came not from orders, but from the undeniable reality of the light-bearer's presence. Necrons hesitated, their systems unable to reconcile what they faced. Even the Black Legion reeled, their commanders faltering as the impossible asserted itself in the center of their assault. Lucifer moved forward with calm certainty, each step radiating authority that resonated even across the twisted corridors of the Imperium. He did not raise a weapon, did not issue commands. The battlefield bent to his presence, not through force, but through recognition, a truth that defied fear, corruption, and despair alike. The remnants of the chaos tide surged one last time, bolstered by warped sorcery and the fury of desperate commanders. Warp flames licked the air, demons shrieked, and engines roared with intent to annihilate. Yet each attack faltered as it approached him. Bolts scattered, energy twisted, and the very fabric of the moon seemed to resist their impact. Presence had become power, certainty had become armor, and the impossible had become absolute. Lucifer stopped at the center of the ruined cathedral, light spreading outward, touching every corner of the battlefield. His gaze swept across the armies, pausing on each faction. Imperial soldiers, fear-struck yet resolute. Necrons scanning endlessly. Black Legion, rage coiled tightly in hesitation. He saw the truth of all their intentions, all their fears, all their desires laid bare. None could match him in this moment, not because they lacked strength, but because he had walked beyond fear itself and returned unshaken. Celestiana spoke softly beside him. They will not rise again, not as they were. No, Lucifer replied, voice steady, deliberate. They will rise only as they must. Nothing else survives unchallenged. A tremor shook the ground. The final demonic presences that had lingered along the periphery collapsed inward, retreating back to the rifts that birthed them, their forms dissolving under the weight of an authority they could not comprehend. Carax fell to one knee, his spear shattered, rage strangled by the undeniable reality before him. The Black Legion recoiled, the cohesion of their attack broken, leaving only scattered, confused remnants. The Necron overlord paused, its calculations endlessly recycling, unable to reconcile the anomaly that had undone the strategies of millennia. Malachi approached slowly, hammer in hand, his mind racing to comprehend what he had witnessed. You have reshaped this battlefield alone, he said, awe evident in his tone. The Imperium, the damned, the machines, none could stand before you. Lucifer turned to him, the calm in his gaze both comforting and terrifying. I have not defeated them, he said. I have only revealed what is already true. Power is not always measured in strength. It is measured in choice, in presence, in the courage to defy the dark when all else seems lost. Celestiane, rising fully, moved to stand beside him. And the Imperium? Chaos? The galaxy? Her voice quivered. What comes next? Lucifer looked toward the horizon, where the storm of war had once surged. Nothing moved there now. Silence held the air, broken only by distant cries of mortals tending to the wounded. What comes next, he said, depends on what they choose to do with the moment I have given them. The galaxy does not belong to gods or tyrants. It belongs to those who will stand in defiance. The ground beneath the shattered cathedral began to settle. Dust and rubble fell slowly, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the conclusion. The light around Lucifer dimmed subtly, no longer flaring in radiant authority, but settling into a quiet, enduring glow, an aura of presence that remained long after his actions had ended. Celestiane's wings shimmered beside him, golden and unbroken, a symbol of hope rekindled amid ruin. Malachi exhaled, voice nearly a whisper. Then you leave us, with the choice. Lucifer nodded. Yes, always the choice. His gaze swept over the battlefield one final time, resting on the distant, retreating legions, the soldiers tending the wounded, the shattered monuments of hope and despair alike. I do not rule this world. I have only reminded it that light, even when fallen, cannot be extinguished by darkness alone. He took a slow step forward, and the winds of the moon stirred in response. Dust and ash swirled around him, carrying the scent of fire and earth, mingling with the remnants of warp energy fading from the rifts. The armies remained frozen in reverent silence, unsure if he would strike again or depart. The balance of fear and hope hovered on a knife's edge. Without a word, Lucifer turned toward the edge of the battlefield. The ruins and the living bore witness as he walked away, each step measured, deliberate, and impossibly calm. Celestian followed him, healed in body if not in spirit, carrying the light forward into a galaxy that had glimpsed the impossible and survived. Malachi watched, understanding at last that some powers exist not to dominate, but to remind the universe of what is possible when courage faces despair without yielding. And as Lucifer disappeared beyond the horizon, the winds of the dead moon whispered across the battlefield, carrying a single truth to every soldier, demon, and machine present. Even in the darkest cosmos, even among the damned and the dead, the light-bearer had walked, and the throne that should have been made for gods and kings was unnecessary. The measure of power lay in the choices made, in the courage to stand when annihilation was certain, and in the defiance of darkness itself. The galaxy trembled, and the story of the Lightbringer endured,